Good evening, everybody. So this is another attempt to replace the pen casts. I've heard from a couple people it worked well for them, but I think most people it was kind of challenging. So I'm doing or trying to kind of modify pencast. So I drew these all up using the pen system, but I'm going to now add the auditory part of this with just recording a video. I also kind of colorize these a bit, try to make it a little more clear what's what. Hopefully that'll make the anatomy stand out better. Let me know if this is a more helpful way to present the information. So this upper part here is just kind of a way of reminder. Um, I'm overviewing the big concepts of pacemakers and defibrillators. The medical videos are actually quite good. I don't see a reason to recreate something that actually does a really good job. And since a bunch of those are done by doctors, it gives a medical perspective that I think is important. We want to get used to, particularly as biomedical engineers, being able to listen to what doctors say and to kind of see their unique perspective. What is it that matters? Because ultimately, it's them who are kind of the one who's going to guide us into what's needed. We're doing it for the patients, but kind of at the doctor's suggestion of what's the right thing to do. So anyway, it's good to kind of see how they look at things. So when we're dealing with pacemakers and defibrillators, they're very, very similar. The real difference is pacemakers are low voltage and defibrillators can do low and high voltage. So if you really want to get down to the base thing, defibrillators add a bunch of caps so they can charge up and deliver a high voltage shock in addition to. So it's like pacemaker plus plus. But to see some of the ideas, I want you to think for a sec about the electrical system in the heart and what can go wrong. And that's basically what these are trying to basically do the training of. So remember, we've got our SA node. That's what kind of starts the whole thing. And the SA node sends out, and we've got a whole bunch of little electrical interconnections, cells that are going to distribute these electrical charge to both of the atria, and as it progresses down, particularly in this direction, you get this little P upshoot. So that's the initial shot from the SA node, and then comes down to the AV node, which shoots up to the bundle of His, and then we get these two branches that are passing down, and this whole part here, because it kind of looks like it's shooting between these two, you get this little Q down shot. It's a little bit bigger on this side, so it kind of looks like it's going, that direction, which is why it kind of shoots down. Comes down across. This again is the much bigger one. So even though they're going in both directions, I tried to make this side a little fatter to let you realize the heart is thicker on this side, and therefore that causes our big R peak here. And then that last little kind of shoot back to get the tip gives us this down shot for the S, a little bit of gap, and then we get the repolarization. So that gives us our T wave. And there's pacemakers and defibrillators, one of the probably biggest core ideas behind them is timing. So I'm going to look particularly at two time intervals. There's a lot that can be looked at, but these are particularly crucial: P to Q and S to T. So P to Q is looking at the atria fire, that's P, do the ventricles fire, and distribute the blood in a reasonable enough time period that it's good for syncing. And the S to T is looking at basically do the ventricles kind of reset properly in the time that they need to. So let's consider how a pacemaker is going to handle these, and we'll take them in issues of different problems. Let's consider a single chamber. So a single chamber, there's a couple things that could do single chamber. One of the most common ones that's in is they kind of run this wire down into the ventricle. So this is your pacemaker right here. And right? So this pacemaker, this is the actual device. It's got the timing circuits and the electrical, and it sends down this wire. This is usually stuck under the skin. So if you look at the surgical one, and they were packing in all the cotton balls with iodine in that to create the pouch under the skin, that was to insert this device. And then when they were doing the wire, they were kind of shoving in, and there was a tiny bit of blood. They were actually injecting, right, coming through this blood vessel right into the right atria, and very often you'll go down to this ventricle. They go to this ventricle if what the problem is that you will get a pulse from P, but QRS doesn't follow in the proper timing. The most common thing that can happen is this PQ is too long, or it sometimes doesn't happen at all. A few ways that can happen, but particularly very slow heartbeats. This is the most basic type of pacemaker, and this allows them, they can kind of sense here, okay, we saw that there was a little bit of an electric pulse, we saw the P wave, they activate one of the timers that counts down from P to Q. If they don't sense the ventricles getting their release of the QRS in time, it will send a shock out. Again, it's a low voltage shock, and it basically causes this QRS. So it causes the ventricles to contract and then ejects the blood. So it basically keeps this PQ timing from getting too large. You can occasionally also, if there's a problem that the P doesn't happen long enough after the T, they can also go to the heart. Very often, the one that goes to the atria, if they're doing that, they'll probably do a dual chamber, because if you're having a problem there, you probably have other problems also. So I guess the dead most common one is kind of coming in here, straight through this valve, down into the ventricle, and that keeps them both going. The reason they go this way is that basically this is the less muscular side, number one, and all the blood is kind of coming nicely in here, so it's an easy flow. It's not as kind of pressured. This is the return from the rest of the body. And the less muscular, it doesn't matter. It only has to eject here and go through the lungs and come back. So even if this causes a little bit of non-perfect seal, it still will function good enough. You really wouldn't want to do that on this side. So in any case, if you have to go to the dual chamber, and usually a dual chamber, you have kind of these, you'll have two wires also. Let's see if I can draw a second wire here. So usually there's two wires that will then come down this bundle. Let me see if I can, there. Okay, just decided to draw a rectangle for me. Thank you, silly little annotation software. Okay, there we go. And we can come in. So this one, if I can get into the atria here, I only need on one side of the atria, and that's to start the P. So then I'll have two of these that are going to be able to start. So I have one wire that's coming down. So it's dual chamber. You can also, this is a single wire. This is two wire. So the two wires come off here. I'm not going to try to redraw that because that's really narrow. They split and come in, one to the atria, one to the ventricle. And that allows me to start P if after T has fired or after QRS has gone. We take a look at the timing and make sure that if within a reasonable time period, the doctor just picks the heartbeat, and you figure whatever you want, a minimum of, say, 60 beats a minute, then you want 1 beat a second, which is 1,000 milliseconds. So you set your timer. If it takes more than 1,000 milliseconds, send the next beat out. The heart's operating too slow, and the doctor can do them. So typically pacemakers, particularly these single and dual chamber, are usually trying to deal with too slow of a heartbeat. They can also deal with cases where um, there's more, it's beating too fast. But typically with the single and dual chamber, that's what we're considering with. Um, Now, another kind of unique problem that'll happen is slowly this PQ can actually start to grow. Um, and it grows kind of in a pattern. So like the first pulse, it might be this long, and then the next heartbeat, it'll be a little bit longer, and then the next heartbeat, it'll be a little bit longer. Um, and it so maybe there'll be like a series of three of these get longer and longer, and the fourth one there'll be no QRS, and then it'll start back over again. And so the videos talk about this as one of those kind of standard errors. And this combination allows us to deal with that because we can kind of reset them. The final one that's on here is called a 3-wire system, or a CRT, or cardiac resync therapy. There's a third wire, and we have that third wire kind of comes. This will be fun. Okay, the third wire kind of comes out, and it goes around back, and it implants on the outside of the wall here. We have no good easy way to come into this, like I mentioned before, so we just come out and around and back in. So now I've got 3 chambers that are dealt with, 2 interior, 1 exterior, and the exterior one that's on here now allows me, since I've got both ventricles, it deals, and the resync tells you its problem. What happens if these two get out of line? Which often means these two inner, so it splits, and there's a timing when it goes down. But what if one of them's damaged? If one of them's damaged, it could be slower. So say, for instance, it's slower down this side here. That would mean that the right side of my heart will get its pulse first, and then the other one second. And if they're not synchronized, they won't contract properly, and the heart will just kind of be shaking, and it will not, it doesn't get a good ejection, and so the body doesn't get a good flow of blood. So when you have all 3 of these wires, you can now cause the 2 sides of the heart to beat simultaneously, because if you notice one side is not getting it as fast, you can cause that side to start beating, and you can adjust them. So pretty much all of these usually also have sensors on them. Blood temperature, oxygenation, you can measure breathing rate. Often there'll be an accelerometer on this, and the purpose of all those is to tell some basic things. Is this person in a hot situation? Are they potentially exercising? Right? They can take a look at a lot of these, different situations, and try to now adjust the heartbeat, because you want to do different things if the person is just running a little too warm, as opposed to if the person is, for instance, exercising. So your reactions are going to be different. So the key thing with any of these is I can do low voltage shocks, I can measure and monitor a bunch of stuff, and I have lots of different timers that the doctors can use to find out when any of these pulses, and we'll just measure the electrical things just like you did, but we're right on top of the heart now, so it's really easy to get those signals. And we can just respond. Oh, I saw a peak, and away we go. All right, let's talk about defibrillators. Defibrillators do everything this does. Pretty much nowadays, old ones, they didn't necessarily, but honestly, for the last 40 years, pretty much a defibrillator has a pacemaker, and it adds some extra stuff. So the most common type of defibrillator when we're talking about on a person is an ICD. You'll actually, probably even more common nowadays, is you'll see the defibrillators that are stuck in buildings that are used, or hospital stuff. But when we're starting to talk about devices, we usually think of ICDs from our design area, although they're all defibrillators, and they work in a very similar way on the restarting of the heart. So a pacemaker cannot restart a heart. Their whole purpose is to handle heartbeat irregularities, so basically rate and rhythm issues. so the two R's. So the rate is how fast the person's going, and the rhythm, all the timings between them okay, are the two sides synced up, all that kinds of stuff. So, um, how long between them, and is the rhythm happening at a nice standard pattern, or is it kind of irregular? Defibrillators will do that, but now they add this ability to start a stopped heart. Sadly, there's a lot of people who just have a sudden cardiac event. Their heart stops beating, and they just drop over dead. And it's tragic. You'll sometimes see them on like sporting events, like a really healthy young high school basketball player or something will just drop dead on the court. It's not like it happens all the time, but it happens sadly probably at least once a year. And in the larger public, there's many people who do go on this. Last time I checked, I thought it was somewhere in the tens of thousands in the United States alone. So it's a fairly decent number of people. If they had a defibrillator on them, they would actually be able to survive that event. What happens is, it's doing all these. It's got the probes, so the wire. I'm not going to draw it because it'll just make everything ugly. But you got all those wires coming in. But it also has a coil that comes down across, usually on the outside, just on the outside of the heart area, and it goes kind of across in this type of an angle. In addition to all the other, depending on what type of a timing syncs they need. But the defibrillation edition has this coil, and then inside, there's a bunch of capacitors down here, and just kind of imagine a whole bunch of caps copied all along there. Now, what will happen is when it measures that, all of a sudden the pulse is no longer there at all. It's not just like, it's late, or, sometimes it forgets and then it picks up again. Just boom, gone. It will start doing, it's been monitoring the whole time, but it will start charging up these capacitors, getting ready to deliver a high voltage shock. And it'll deliver that high voltage shock. If the heart doesn't show that it was just a late beat, it'll deliver that high voltage shock right across this coil. And that high voltage shock is enough to start this entire system going all over again. And so usually that one kind of across, and all of a sudden you'll get a rhythm back, and then the pacemaker portions can then take over. And that's kind of really that crucial thing. You need that shock kind of running down the heart, which is delivered by the coil. That coil is bigger and everything else, and sometimes that's all the person needs. Sometimes they don't even need the timing issue. And so rather, if all you need is the ability to restart because of it, and luckily both pacemakers and defibrillators are record over their whole life. So when they go to a doctor's office, the doctor can download the data and see how the person's doing. That's another big addition both of these buy for us. But the wearable cardiac defibrillator, WCD, is, I don't want to make it sound like it's like you're wearing it on clothing, even though the name kind of does make it sound like that. The big implantable difference is it doesn't go into the blood vessels. It doesn't go into the heart. It lays across kind of it's under the skin, but it's not inside the circulatory system. And they'll basically just take that, run the wire, run the coil straight across, on top of the heart, but not in any of the blood system. And so it's kind of just an under the skin type of an action, but it's still good enough to be able to send that shock, and they place the coil across the top. It can still do the monitoring and everything. So it monitors the heart, and if the heartbeat stops, charges up the caps, and then restart the heart, person is able to recover. For somebody who doesn't have one of these and they have a sudden cardiac event, which could either be natural or it could be induced by some external thing like an electric shock, that's when we have the devices that are sometimes with med kits, and they love these in movies and TV shows, and they'll get the box and they'll hook up and there'll be patches, and those patches are usually hooked so that there's kind of, this would be where the person's shoulders are kind of coming across here, right? I never claimed to be an artist. This is grossly out of scale in proportion to, but you have one of the patches that's right, kind of, usually here on the person's right shoulder, and then the other one is usually placed on the side of their chest, kind of like underneath where their arm is. And again, that's to get that kind of, that's to get the across the heart action that's going. So you place one down here, it gets it towards the bottom, place the other up towards the upper shoulder area, and across it goes. This is actually, my heart's tilted a little too much here, but you get the idea. So, it gives you the basic situation. And this can, again, between these two patches, they're really big. You stick them right on the chest and hook across. And that actually, between those two large passes, we do a single monitoring, just like you were doing on yours. And if it notices the heartbeat goes away, it'll give you a warning. It's got that big red button because you're supposed to warn everybody in the environment, make sure it's clear. They're not sitting on a giant metal sheet that's going to charge the electricity out and electrocute people. They're not in water, which is dangerous, things of that sort. So there's a lot of things that the defibrillator that's external like this can't tell. It's automated in measuring the heart and saying, hey, from what I can measure here, it's good. You have to handle the whole environmental thing. That's why you get the red button to say, you're good, you can deliver the shock. You also don't want somebody touching the person because that shock will go into them too, and now you might have two people down. So anyway, that's the basic three types that are here. We've got our three types of pacemakers, and technically for the implantable ones here, since you are a pacemaker and more, you'll have these plus the coil. So anyway, it's just like a bigger box and expanded. So now hopefully that'll give you a good perspective on pacemakers and defibrillators. Make sure you watch the videos. If you understand all this, what I want to ask as questions for design purposes should be pretty good. If you understand about the capacitors and that, the teardown video that's at the very end, which kind of pulls it apart and shows how they built one of these, should be a lot of fun. I saw that one a number of years ago, and I just thought, oh, that's totally cool. So I figured you would enjoy it as well. Hope everything is going great with people, and I will hopefully talk to you all soon. God bless.